After decades building my company, my own daughter-in-law, the CEO, publicly fired me, declaring I was outdated. The entire company watched, knowing my sacrifices. Yet I simply smiled, a quiet confidence settling in. "Good luck, Seraphina," I whispered. "You're going to need it." Her face paled. This wasn't just a firing, it was a declaration of war. Like, share, and tell me where you're listening from. The stale air in the main conference room always felt heavy before a big announcement, but today it felt thick with an unspoken dread. I, Eleanor Vance, a woman of 65 years, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, my gaze sweeping across the faces of the 23 employees gathered. Some were veterans, like myself, with decades invested in this company. Others were eager young minds, still bright with naive ambition. As a vice president, these faces, these people, were more than just colleagues. They were a second family, the fabric of my professional life for nearly 4 decades. The door swung open and Seraphina Hayes, my daughter-in-law and unfortunately the newly appointed CEO, strode in. Her designer suit, sharp and unyielding, seemed to announce her presence more loudly than her high heels clicking on the floor. She took her place at the podium, her expression devoid of warmth, a stark contrast to the nervous energy humming in the room. Seraphina, who had only been with the company for 5 years, cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the silence. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her tone clipped and precise. "I've called this meeting to outline our new vision for the company's future. We need innovation, agility, and a workforce that reflects those values. Frankly," she paused, her eyes cold and calculating, deliberately finding mine, "we don't want outdated people in this company anymore." The words hung in the air, a venomous declaration. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Suddenly, all 23 pairs of eyes, startled and understanding, pivoted from Seraphina to me. It wasn't a casual glance, it was a spotlight, a public execution. I felt the heat of their pity, their shock, their dawning realization of what was coming. Seraphina had orchestrated this, a meticulously planned humiliation, delivered on a silver platter for all to witness. She continued, her voice gaining a cruel edge. "Effective immediately, Eleanor, your services are no longer needed. I expect your office to be completely cleared by the end of the day." The finality of her tone was brutal. There was no softer phrasing, no quiet conversation, no respect for the woman who had helped build the very foundation she now stood upon. Across the table, Chloe from accounting, a young woman I had mentored since she was an intern, quickly dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Mark from marketing, a man who had worked alongside me for 15 years, looked utterly stunned, his jaw slacked in disbelief. These people, many of whom had celebrated my triumphs and supported me through personal losses, were now forced to watch this public dismantling of my career. They truly were like family, and their silent anguish was a sharper pain than Seraphina's words. I felt a slight tremor in my knees as I pushed back my chair, standing slowly, deliberately. 65 years felt like 100 in that moment, each year etched into the stiffness of my joints. Yet an odd, almost serene calm washed over me. It was a clarity that cut through the shock. I met Seraphina's gaze, a small, unreadable smile touching my lips. "Well," I said, my voice steady, perhaps a little too calm for the gravity of the situation, "I suppose that's that." I reached for my notepad and pen, gathering them with meticulous care. I saw the flicker in Seraphina's eyes, a fleeting expectation of tears, of an outburst, of the emotional breakdown she had so clearly hoped to provoke. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. My composure, I realized, was a silent weapon. As I turned towards the door, ready to make my exit, a voice boomed from the back of the room. "Eleanor, this isn't right. You built this place." It was Leo from design, his face flushed with indignation. A wave of murmuring followed, an unspoken agreement from the others. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I turned back, offering Leo a gentle, appreciative nod. His words, honest and heartfelt, were a balm. In that brief moment, I saw something shift in Seraphina's usually impenetrable facade, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even a hint of alarm. My calm departure, coupled with Leo's public defiance, had clearly not gone according to her script. The walk from the conference room to my own office, usually a mere 2-minute stroll, felt like an endless journey, a forced march through the corridors of my past. 37 years. From a secretary fresh out of college, eager to learn and prove myself, to a vice president, instrumental in steering this company through countless challenges and triumphs. Now it was all over in 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes and my life's work had been summarily dismissed. My office, my sanctuary, my second home, now looked alien. The familiar stacks of reports, the framed photos of company events, the awards glinting on the shelf, all of it seemed to shrink, stripped of their significance by Seraphina's harsh decree. It was no longer a place of purpose, but merely a space to be vacated. I pulled a sturdy charity box from the back of my closet. It felt appropriate. My career, my contributions, now reduced to remnants to be packed away. I began methodically, calmly. Photos of old Christmas parties, the faded plaque for Employee of the Year from 2 decades ago, the handwritten thank you notes from clients, each item a memory, a testament to a life lived fully within these walls. A soft knock interrupted my somber task. I looked up to see Maya, a bright young accountant from the 3rd floor, standing in my doorway, her eyes red-rimmed and glistening. "Mrs. Vance," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "This is wrong. Everyone knows what you've done for us, for this company." I offered her a small, gentle smile, touched by her genuine distress. "Sometimes," I said, trying to infuse my voice with a wisdom I didn't entirely feel, "change is necessary, Maya." But even as I spoke the words, I didn't believe them. This wasn't about change, not truly. This was about something else entirely, something far more personal and vindictive. By 4 o'clock, my office was bare. The walls looked stark, the desk eerily clean. The charity box, filled with the tangible fragments of my professional life, felt surprisingly light. I lifted it and began my final walk through the office floor. Heads snapped up as I passed, then quickly dropped, employees feigning intense concentration on their screens. A few, like Chloe, couldn't hide their tears, offering me helpless glances. Others simply offered small, solemn nods. It was a silent send-off, full of unspoken apologies and shared sorrow. As I reached the elevator bank, Seraphina was waiting. She leaned against the wall, her arms crossed, a satisfied, almost triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on the charity box. "I trust you have everything, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. I met her eyes, taking in her expensive silk blouse, the diamond studs winking from her ears, the sparkling wedding ring on her left hand, a ring that symbolized a bond she seemed intent on fracturing. "I do," I replied, my voice steady, calm, perhaps even a little too serene for her liking. Then a slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of defeat, but one of knowing. "Good luck, Seraphina," I said, holding her gaze. "You are going to need it." For a fleeting second, I saw it, a flash of panic, a ripple of genuine uncertainty in her eyes, before the elevator doors slid shut, sealing me inside. She thought this was over. She was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The engine hummed softly beneath me, a stark contrast to the turbulent storm raging inside. I sat in my car, parked idly in the company lot, the charity box resting on the passenger seat like a morbid monument to my career. My hands, still tingling from the shock of Seraphina's public dismissal, gripped the steering wheel. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the frantic drumming of my own heart. I closed my eyes, seeking an anchor, and my mind, unbidden, drifted back 3 years to the day Seraphina Hayes first entered our lives. It felt like yesterday, yet a lifetime ago. Daniel, my son, my only child, had called me, his voice practically buzzing with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. Mom, he'd chirped. "I want you to meet someone special this Sunday. Can you make your famous pot roast?" My heart had swelled. Daniel, 38 then, had been through his share of relationships, but none had ever elicited such unadulterated joy. He hadn't been this smitten, this openly giddy, since his first serious crush in high school. I was absolutely delighted. The Sunday preparations became a whirlwind of loving activity. I polished the silverware until it gleamed, arranged my best china, and filled the house with the comforting aroma of rosemary and slow-cooked beef. Every cushion was fluffed, every surface dusted. My little home, modest but full of love, had to be perfect for this special someone. I pictured a sweet, perhaps a little shy, woman who would appreciate Daniel's kind heart and my well-meaning fussing. Then, she arrived. Seraphina Hayes. She stood on my porch, Daniel beaming beside her, and my breath caught. Tall, willowy, with an abundance of perfectly styled blonde hair that cascaded over her shoulders, she looked like she'd stepped directly off the cover of a glossy fashion magazine. Her dress, a simple but undoubtedly expensive cut, hugged her slender frame, and her smile was radiant, a flawless curve of pearly white teeth. She exuded an aura of polished sophistication that felt utterly out of place in my cozy, lived-in entryway. "Mom, this is Seraphina Hayes," Daniel announced, his pride almost palpable. "Seraphina, this is my mother, Eleanor." His eyes, usually so astute, were completely dazed by her presence. Seraphina extended a hand toward me, her grip surprisingly firm, confident. Her smile, as I observed up close, remained magazine perfect, fixed and unyielding. But deep within her pale blue eyes, a subtle gleam, almost imperceptible, caught my attention. It was a calculating glint, a flash of something sharp and assessing that momentarily unsettled me. My maternal instincts, usually the reliable compass, immediately buzzed with a low thrum of warning. "Please call me Eleanor," I said, trying to override that uneasy feeling with my usual warmth. I squeezed her hand, attempting to gauge her reaction. "I've heard absolutely nothing about you, young lady, which means my son has been keeping secrets," I teased, aiming to lighten the atmosphere and perhaps draw out a genuine laugh. Daniel chuckled, but it was a little too loud, a little too forced. He shifted his weight, glancing nervously between us. "I wanted it to be a surprise, Mom. We met at a business conference a few months ago." The admission felt rehearsed, like a line he'd practiced. Throughout dinner, Seraphina played the part of the perfect guest. She complimented my pot roast with exquisite detail, admiring the tenderness of the meat and the richness of the gravy. She asked thoughtful questions about the faded family photos on the mantelpiece, expressing genuine interest in the stories behind them. When it came time to clear the table, she gracefully insisted on helping, though I noticed her movements were meticulously careful, her slender fingers avoiding any direct contact with the dishwater, clearly safeguarding her perfectly manicured, chip-free nails. It was a performance, polished and convincing, but the critical part of me watched for the seams. "Your home is so cozy, Eleanor," she remarked as she placed a stack of plates on the counter, her eyes sweeping over my slightly worn armchair and the overflowing bookshelves. The word cozy hung in the air, seemingly innocuous, but my shoulders instinctively tensed. It wasn't the warmth of appreciation I heard in her voice, but a thinly veiled condescension, as if cozy was a polite euphemism for small, dated, or perhaps even unambitious. I caught her once when she thought my back was turned, surveying my modest furnishings with the detached air of someone visiting a quaint museum. An interesting, perhaps charming, but ultimately irrelevant relic from another era. It was a look that confirmed my earlier unease. My comfortable, beloved home was, to her, merely an artifact. After they finally left, the silence of the house felt heavy. I stared at the faint, perfect imprint of Seraphina's deep red lipstick on the rim of her teacup. It was a beautiful shade, vibrant and bold, just like her. But it also felt like a brand, an indelible mark left behind. Unable to shake the feeling, I immediately called my sister Brenda. "There's something off about her, Bren," I confessed, my voice low and worried. "She's too perfect." Brenda, ever the pragmatist, listened patiently. "Eleanor," she gently reminded me, "you always say that about Daniel's girlfriends. Remember Jessica, the one you swore was a gold digger? She ended up marrying a carpenter and moving to Oregon." Brenda was right, of course. I knew I was overprotective, perhaps excessively so. Ever since Daniel's father died when he was only 15, leaving me to raise our son alone, he had been my entire world. My fierce protectiveness, a constant hum beneath the surface, often clouded my judgment when it came to his romantic choices. I loved him fiercely, and I wanted only the best for him. Over the next few months, Seraphina seamlessly wove herself deeper and deeper into Daniel's life. I learned more about her background: an MBA from Northwestern, a stint in corporate consulting, now between jobs due to what she vaguely termed philosophical differences with her last firm. Daniel was utterly enchanted. Under her influence, his apartment, once a bachelor's den of comfortable chaos, transformed into a minimalist showpiece. His wardrobe, once a rotation of casual shirts and well-worn jeans, now featured tailored jackets and designer shoes. "She has such good taste, Mom," he gushed during one of our weekly calls. "It's like having a whole new life." That phrase, "a whole new life," stuck with me, a tiny shard of glass in my mind. It wasn't the joy in his voice that bothered me, but the subtle implication behind the words. A whole new life suggested that his old wife, the one I had helped him build, the one we had shared for so long, hadn't been good enough. And as I sat in my car now, the ghost of that moment haunted me, an echo of the first seed of doubt planted in my heart long before I understood its bitter fruit. The initial unease I felt about Seraphina deepened over the following months, twisting into a gnawing anxiety. Daniel's changes, once subtle, became more pronounced, more alarming. Our weekly lunches, a cherished tradition since his high school days, began to be missed. At first, it was, "Seraphina had a last-minute appointment," or "We're trying that new fusion place she read about." Soon the excuses became less detailed, the absences more frequent, until our standing dates simply faded away unacknowledged. When we did manage to meet, Seraphina was almost always present. Her presence wasn't just physical, it was an active force, a subtle yet persistent redirection of conversation. If I started telling an old anecdote about Daniel's childhood, she would expertly pivot to a new topic, usually about their exciting plans or her impressive career. If Daniel started a story, she'd often interject, a gentle hand on his arm, a sweet smile on her face. "Oh, Daniel," she'd coo, "you're being modest." But it wasn't modesty she was correcting. It was a subtle implication that his old stories, his old life, weren't quite up to her standards, that he was somehow downplaying his new, elevated success for my benefit. It was a constant, low-level undermining, an invisible wall rising between us. 18 months after their initial meeting, the wedding announcement came. Daniel called, his voice lighter than it had been in months, though a familiar undertone of nervousness was detectable. "Mom, we're getting married." A small, intimate ceremony in Napa Valley. "Nothing fancy," he assured me, as if preempting my concern about expense. Yet I knew Napa Valley wasn't nothing fancy. The venue he described later, a sprawling vineyard estate, would have cost a fortune, far more than he could afford on his salary alone. It was another sign of Seraphina's influence, her taste for the grand and expensive. I tried desperately to be supportive. My son was happy, or so he said, and his happiness was, after all, my only true wish. I focused on that, trying to ignore the increasingly uncomfortable feeling that gnawed at my insides. But Seraphina made it relentlessly difficult. She'd call me, sometimes several times a week, to ask my opinion on various wedding details, the floral arrangements, the menu, the guest list. I'd offer thoughtful suggestions, drawing on decades of experience organizing events, both personal and professional. Each time she would listen patiently, then explain why, with a saccharine sweetness, why my ideas simply wouldn't work. "Eleanor, that's sweet," she'd say, "but we're really going for a more sophisticated aesthetic." Or, "Oh, we considered that, but it's just a little too traditional for our vision." It was a cruel game, making me feel included while systematically dismissing every single one of my contributions, cementing my place as an outdated, irrelevant voice. The night before the wedding, sequestered in my elegant but impersonal hotel room in Napa, the dam finally broke. I called Brenda, my voice thick with tears, a rare occurrence for me. "I feel like I'm losing him, Bren," I confessed, the words raw and painful. "It's like she's building a wall around him, and I can't get through." Brenda, ever the steady sister, offered comfort, her voice soothing over the phone. "Eleanor, honey, this is normal. Children grow up, they get married, the dynamic changes. It doesn't mean you've lost him." I knew logically that she was right, but this felt different. This wasn't the natural evolution of a son's life. It felt like a calculated, systematic erasure. Seraphina was subtly, meticulously chipping away at my relationship with Daniel, making me seem like the overly emotional, jealous mother if I ever dared to point it out. It was a masterful, silent campaign, and I felt utterly powerless against it. She wasn't just marrying my son, she was subtly taking ownership of him, piece by piece. The morning after the wedding, Daniel hugged me goodbye outside the vineyard estate. He looked tired but genuinely happy, a deep sense of contentment in his eyes. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he murmured, squeezing me tight. "I'm really happy." "That's all I want, my darling," I whispered back, holding him close, trying to memorize the feel of his embrace. "Your happiness." As he pulled away, he opened the passenger door of their rented car for Seraphina. She slid in, her hand immediately finding his arm, a possessive gesture that made my stomach clench. As they drove away, their car disappearing down the long, tree-lined driveway, I stood there, a knot of dread tightening in my chest. I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that this wasn't just a goodbye for the weekend. It was a goodbye to a part of my life, to the easy, uncomplicated relationship I had once shared with my son. Now, 3 years later, sitting in the company parking lot with my charity box of career remnants beside me, the full, devastating clarity of that moment struck me. My instincts, which Brenda had gently tried to dismiss, had been absolutely right. Seraphina didn't just want Daniel's love. She wanted his entire life. She wanted to rebuild him in her image, to control his narrative, to dictate his relationships. And firing me publicly and cruelly was merely the latest, most audacious step in her methodical takeover. But why? Why was Daniel letting this happen? The Daniel I had raised, the loyal, kind, and fiercely protective son, would never have stood by while his mother was humiliated. Unless, of course, he didn't know the full truth. Unless Seraphina had lied to him, carefully constructed a narrative that painted me as the villain, the outdated hindrance. If she had lied about this, about my professional worth and my position, what else had she lied about? The question hung heavy in the air, a chilling harbinger of battles yet to come. I was halfway home, the quiet hum of the road a dull counterpoint to the storm brewing within me, when my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Daniel's name, and my heart gave a hopeful leap. Perhaps he'd heard. Perhaps someone had told him. "Hello, sweetheart," I answered, trying to keep my voice light, masking the tremor of anticipation. "Mom," Daniel's voice was tight, edged with a frantic energy I rarely heard. "I just landed at the airport. I'm heading straight to the office. Is everything okay? Seraphina's been sending me strange texts all day, saying she had to handle a difficult personnel matter and that you resigned for personal reasons. What's going on?" My breath caught in my throat. He didn't know. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Seraphina had orchestrated my public humiliation, my complete dismissal, while he was 3,000 miles away, blissfully unaware, on a business trip. The sheer calculation of it, the cold-blooded planning, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. "I'm fine, dear," I said, forcing a calm into my voice that I didn't feel. My mind raced, trying to process this new information, trying to decide how to respond. "Just had an interesting day at work. You should probably go straight home, though. I'm sure Seraphina missed you, and I imagine she has a lot to tell you." I wanted to see her face when she had to explain this. "Mom, you sound weird," he pressed, clearly picking up on the underlying tension in my tone. "What's going on? Don't hide anything from me." His voice was firm, the old Daniel, demanding honesty. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow," I replied, a sudden steely resolve hardening my resolve. "Just drive safely, okay? We'll talk soon." And with that, I ended the call, leaving Seraphina to face the music she had so meticulously composed. Let her spin her web of lies to her unsuspecting husband. My story would wait. Story would. I finally pulled into my driveway, the familiar comfort of my small home, a welcome embrace after the day's ordeal. Inside, the quiet felt heavy. I went straight to the kitchen, the ritual of making tea a grounding force. As the kettle whistled, I stared at the charity box, still on the passenger seat of my car, a visible symbol of everything I had lost and perhaps everything I was about to gain. Just as I poured the steaming water, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Maya, The young accountant with the tear-reddened eyes, my hands still steady despite the day's turmoil, suddenly trembled as I read her message. Mrs. Vance, after you left, Seraphina called an emergency meeting. She told everyone you'd been embezzling funds, and that's why you were terminated. Everyone knows it's not true, but she made us all sign NDAs. I'm so sorry. Embezzling? The mug slipped from my hands, crashing to the tiled floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Hot tea splattered across my kitchen, scalding my skin, but I barely registered the pain. Embezzling? She was accusing me of stealing from the company I had dedicated 37 years of my life to building? The company that was my son's legacy? The sheer audacity, the brazen fabrication, was breathtaking. But it wasn't just the insult that horrified me. It was the terrifying implication. This wasn't just about getting rid of an outdated employee. This was a cover-up, a desperate, calculated attempt to deflect suspicion, to create a smokescreen for something far bigger, far more nefarious. My mind, sharp and analytical even in distress, immediately went to work. I walked almost numbly to my home office. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the company's secure financial systems. I fully expected my access to have been revoked, my digital key to the kingdom nullified. But to my surprise and growing dread, the system granted me entry. All my high-level clearances were still active. What I found made my blood run cold, chilling me to the bone. Not one, not two, but 23 in unauthorized transfers. They had occurred over the past 6 months, systematically draining funds from the company's main accounts, funneling them into a subsidiary account with a generic, untraceable name. The total amount exceeded $200,000. My eyes scanned down to the authorization section, my heart hammering against my ribs. Each transfer bore 2 signatures, Seraphina Hayes Vance, and beside it, D. Vance, secondary authorization. Daniel's signature, or I thought a sickening suspicion coiling in my gut, a very convincing forgery. Before I could delve deeper, before I could fully process the enormity of what I had uncovered, I heard the familiar thud of a car door slamming outside. A split second later, the roar of Daniel's BMW engine being switched off. My son was home. He burst through my front door, his face a mask of confusion and concern, streaks of fatigue visible beneath his eyes from his flight. "Mom," he gasped, his voice thick with emotion. "What the hell happened today? I went to the office, and it was a madhouse. Seraphina said you quit, but half the staff is calling me, saying you were fired and something about theft." He looked utterly bewildered, his eyes searching mine for answers. "Sit down, Daniel," I said, my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I pointed to the armchair, my gaze firm. "We need to talk. There's a lot you don't know." But he refused to sit, pacing restlessly in my living room, his hands running through his already disheveled hair. "No, Mom, I want to know why my wife is telling me one story and my employees are telling me another. I want to know why you hung up on me. Start from the beginning. Everything, now." And so I did. I recounted the morning meeting, Seraphina's callous dismissal, the shock on my colleagues' faces, the subtle undercurrent of betrayal. I described my exit, my calm exterior masking a fury she hadn't anticipated. And finally, I revealed Maya's text, the devastating accusation of embezzlement. As I spoke, Daniel's face was a canvas of rapidly shifting emotions, initial disbelief giving way to profound anger, then a flash of relief, perhaps, that the truth was finally coming out. The truth, however, was far more complex and dangerous than either of us could have imagined. The tension in my living room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. If you're still with me, I hope you're ready for what comes next. It's a story of betrayal, of lies, and of a mother's unwavering fight for her son. Like, share, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single part of this unfolding drama. Now back to Daniel. Daniel, his face a complex mosaic of anger, disbelief, and a profound sadness, shook his head. "That's impossible, Mom," he said, his voice strained, almost a whisper. "Seraphina wouldn't do that. She knows how much you mean to me, how much you built this company. There has to be a mistake." He still wanted to believe in her, to cling to the image of the woman he had married. I understood. To admit otherwise would be to admit a catastrophic failure in judgment, a deeply personal betrayal. But the evidence was undeniable. I had already printed out the relevant financial records, a stack of crisp papers that felt heavy with their damning truth. I slid them across the coffee table, pushing them gently towards him. "Then explain these, sweetheart," I said, my voice softer than I intended, seeing the pain already etched on his face. He took the papers, his hands trembling slightly, and began to scan them. His eyes darted from the account names to the dates, from the substantial amounts of the transfers to the detailed transaction codes. With each page, the color drained from his face, leaving him pale and ashen. He reached the signature pages, the ones bearing Seraphina Hayes Vance and D. Vance secondary authorization. He stared at them, his brow furrowed in concentration, then slowly, almost reluctantly, traced the loops and flourishes of the D. Vance with his finger. "This isn't my signature," he said, his voice barely audible, a profound shock resonating in every syllable. He looked up, his eyes wide and vulnerable. "I never authorized any of these transfers, Mom, never." "I didn't think you had, dear," I replied, the words thick with a sorrow that transcended my own anger. In that moment, I didn't see the successful 38-year-old man, the business professional. I saw my little boy again, confused and deeply hurt, grappling with a betrayal too enormous to comprehend. He looked back down at the papers, then slowly up at me, a terrible realization dawning in his eyes. "But if I didn't sign these," he stammered, his voice cracking, "and you didn't make these transfers, then—" I finished his sentence, the words hanging heavy in the air between us. "Then your wife has been stealing from the company, Daniel, and forging your signature to cover it up." A profound silence descended upon the room. Daniel sat motionless, the papers clutched in his hands, his gaze fixed on some distant point, lost in the terrible chasm between the woman he loved and the cold, hard evidence laid out before him. He was struggling, visibly, desperately, to reconcile the two. "There has to be an explanation," he said finally, his voice lacking any true conviction, a desperate plea more than an assertion. Maybe she was trying to protect the company or something like that. I reached across the table and took his hand, my touch gentle but firm. "Sweetheart," I said, my gaze unwavering, "look at the pattern. She fired me while you were 3,000 miles away. She then immediately accused me of her own crime, circulating the lie to the entire company. She made employees sign NDAs, silencing anyone who might speak up. This isn't protection, Daniel. This is a meticulously planned cover-up, and it's designed to make sure I take the fall while she continues her illicit activities, safe behind a wall of lies." He pulled his hand away, abruptly, as if my words had physically burned him. He stood up and began to pace, a restless, agitated energy vibrating through him. "If she's been stealing," he muttered, running a hand through his hair, his eyes wild with a nascent fury, "she's been lying to me every single day for months, right under my nose." "I'm afraid it might be longer than that, Daniel," I said, hesitating, knowing these words would cross a line, sever the last thread of his blind devotion. He stopped pacing, turning to face me, his eyes sharp and demanding. "Mom, what do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "I think she's been lying to you since the day you met her, Daniel, about who she is, what she wants, what she's truly capable of." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of unspoken worry, of subtle observations, of a mother's intuition that had been dismissed as overprotective. At that, Daniel finally crumbled. He sank back onto the armchair, burying his face in his hands, a low groan escaping his lips. The image of his head bowed, shoulders slumped, was a mirror of the moment he had learned of his father's death. My heart ached for him, for the pain he was experiencing, the shattering of his world. After a long, agonizing silence, he finally lifted his head, his eyes red but resolute. "I need proof, Mom, absolute proof before I can confront her. Something undeniable, something that leaves no room for doubt, no escape route for her." I understood completely. He needed to be armed, fortified, before facing such a monumental betrayal. "What kind of proof, Daniel?" I asked, my voice steady, ready to help in any way I could. The kind that leaves no room for doubt, he repeated, his gaze fixed on the financial printouts. The kind that shows me exactly who I married. The kind that destroys her carefully constructed facade once and for all. In his determined gaze, I saw the cracks in his blind devotion finally widening, ready to shatter. The illusion was breaking. But I also knew, with a chilling certainty, that discovering the full, unvarnished truth about someone you love, someone you have built a life with, is a dangerous and often devastating journey. "I'm going home," Daniel said finally, his voice thick with a mix of resolve and despair. "I need to look at our personal accounts, at everything. I need to figure out how to handle this without destroying everything." I walked over to him, wrapping my arms around him in a tight embrace, a silent promise. "Daniel, whatever you find, whatever comes next, I'm here. I've always been here for you." He hugged me back just as tightly, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "I know, Mom, and I'm so sorry it took me so long to see it." As he drove away, the faint glow of his taillights disappearing into the twilight, I felt a strange mix of vindication and profound sorrow. The house was quiet once more, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the silence before a storm, a prelude to the unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. The call came at precisely 6 a.m., the jarring ring pulling me from a fitful sleep. It was Daniel. His voice, usually warm and steady, was hollow, raw with exhaustion and a profound grief. "Mom," he rasped, "I need you to come over now. Don't call first, just come. And Mom, bring your key to the office. I need to get into Seraphina's desk." His tone was urgent, leaving no room for questions. I dressed quickly, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and grim anticipation. I retrieved my office key, a relic of my now defunct career, and drove through the pre-dawn quiet, the streets still empty, heading towards the beautiful, expensive home Seraphina had carefully curated for herself and my son. I let myself in. The house was unnaturally silent. I found Daniel in his study, the room usually so pristine, now a chaos of scattered papers, documents, and folders spread across his large mahogany desk and overflowing onto the floor. He sat slumped in his chair, his eyes bloodshot and hollow, two dark pools reflecting the sleepless night and the devastating truths he had uncovered. His shirt was rumpled, his hair disheveled, a stark contrast to the impeccably groomed son I usually saw. He didn't look up immediately, his gaze fixed on a folder clutched in his hands. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. "Mom," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Seraphina's real name isn't Seraphina Hayes. It's Seraphina Dubois." He held up the folder, its contents hinting at a carefully constructed deception. And she was never between jobs when we met. She was fired from her previous corporate consulting firm for embezzlement, just like she tried to frame you for. The words hit me like a physical blow, a chilling confirmation of my deepest, darkest suspicions. How did you find out all of this?" I asked, my voice trembling, the question barely escaping my lips. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine, brimming with an agonizing pain. "I hired a private investigator, Mom," he confessed, his voice thick with shame. "About 6 months ago. The doubts started creeping in, little things, stories that didn't quite add up, discrepancies in her background that I tried to ignore, but they kept nagging at me." "Daniel, why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the question laced with a mixture of hurt and regret. My instincts had been screaming, but I had muted them for his happiness. "Because I was hoping I was wrong, Mom," he admitted, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. "Hoping that my mother's paranoid suspicions had just rubbed off on me. Hoping that she was truly the wonderful woman I thought I had married." He gestured vaguely at the stacks of documents surrounding him, the paper trail of a meticulously planned deception. "Turns out," he said, a bitter laugh escaping him, "your paranoid suspicions were the only honest thing in my entire marriage." I reached out, wanting to comfort him, but he pulled back slightly, still lost in his own torment. "There's more," he said quietly, his voice now even more strained. "Much more." He paused, taking a shaky breath, clearly steeling himself. "The investigator," he explained, "had unearthed records of 2 previous marriages, both to wealthy men, both ending in messy divorces with substantial financial settlements for Seraphina, or rather, Seraphina Dubois. My stomach churned. "Daniel," I whispered, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. "Oh, Daniel, I'm so sorry." He shook his head, his eyes fixed on some unseen horror. "Don't apologize yet, Mom. You haven't heard the worst part." He reached for another document, a medical report, his hand visibly shaking. "Remember when she told me she was pregnant about 6 months into our relationship?" He began, his voice catching, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "When she had the miscarriage that devastated us both, that made me propose to her on the spot, to comfort her, to show her she wasn't alone?" I nodded, remembering his absolute devastation, his heartbreak, and how I had rushed to his side to console him. It was a wound that had healed slowly, leaving a scar on his soul. "There was no pregnancy, Mom," he choked out, his voice cracking. "No miscarriage. She faked the whole thing." The investigator confirmed it with her former gynecologist, who cooperated under legal pressure. He pointed to a copy of a prescription. "She's been on birth control the entire time. The pregnancy test, the ultrasound photos she showed me, the doctor's appointments, the morning sickness, all of it was a meticulously orchestrated lie. All fake." The folder, which I had unconsciously picked up, slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, scattering papers across the floor. "Oh, Daniel," I gasped, the words barely audible. The cruelty, the calculated manipulation was beyond anything I could have imagined. "She used a fake pregnancy to manipulate me into proposing," he continued, his voice rising, laced with an almost unimaginable rage and pain. "Then a fake miscarriage to manipulate me into an immediate wedding. Every single foundational moment of our relationship. Mom," he air quoted the word with venom, "every single memory I cherished, every emotional bond I believed we shared, was a lie. A carefully crafted, utterly baseless lie." As he spoke, my gaze fell upon a stack of glossy surveillance photos mixed in with the other documents. I picked them up, my fingers brushing against the cold, smooth paper. There was Seraphina, laughing, holding hands with a man I didn't recognize, at a restaurant. More photos of them entering and leaving a sleek, modern condo. Receipts, bank statements. "Who is this, Daniel?" I asked, holding up a particularly clear photo of Seraphina leaning intimately against the man, a smile of genuine affection on her face, a smile I rarely saw directed at my son. He looked at the picture, his eyes devoid of emotion, a chilling emptiness in their depths. "Julian Thorne," he said, his voice flat, "her real boyfriend. They've been together the whole time. The investigator followed them for weeks. They were living together, Mom. In a condo she bought, with money stolen from our company." The final revelation hung in the air, a poisonous plume, solidifying the sickening truth. Daniel's voice, though still heavy with pain, began to gain a fragile steadiness as he continued to unravel the intricate tapestry of lies that was Seraphina. Everything she told me about working late, business trips, her sick mother in another state. She was with him, Mom, with Julian. All of it was a lie, every single excuse. I stared at the surveillance photo again, the one of Seraphina laughing, a carefree, genuine happiness illuminating her face, a joy I had never once witnessed her share with Daniel. Her head was tilted back, her hand resting on Julian Thorne's arm, a natural intimacy that spoke volumes. The stark contrast to her calculated smiles and polite demeanor around us was sickening. "How long have you known all this, Daniel?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the sheer scale of the deception leaving me breathless. He sighed, a long, weary exhalation. "The final report from the investigator came yesterday morning, while I was still in Seattle. That's why I was rushing back. I was going to confront her, lay it all out, demand answers." His gaze drifted, haunted by the memory of his frantic journey home. "Instead, I found out she'd fired my mother, my own mother, and was spreading malicious lies about embezzlement. That's when I knew she wasn't just hiding things. She was accelerating whatever endgame she had planned." He reached for his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. The screen flickered to life, revealing a document that made my blood run cold. a divorce petition. It was already filled out, meticulously detailed, and ready to be filed. She's been preparing to divorce me for months, Daniel said, his voice laced with a bitter, hollow laugh. The grounds she's claiming: emotional abuse, forcing her to work excessive hours, isolating her from her family and friends. He scoffed, a raw, cynical sound. The only family and friends she has are fake, just like everything else. He explained how cunning she had been, how carefully she had operated. The stolen money from the company wasn't just dumped into one obvious account. It was siphoned into various subsidiary accounts, many with names cleverly disguised to resemble legitimate business expenses. The forged signatures, while discernible to a trained eye, were good enough to pass casual scrutiny, requiring an expert to definitively prove their falsity. "She's been planning this from the beginning, Mom," he concluded, his voice grim. "Longer than that, I think," I countered, the pieces of the puzzle clicking chillingly into place. "The investigator thinks she's done this before, with both her previous husbands. It's a pattern. Find a successful, affluent man, marry him quickly, gain access to his finances and life, slowly drain assets, meticulously build a divorce case based on fabricated abuse, and then disappear with a substantial settlement, ready to repeat the cycle." The tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in the hallway filled the sudden silence of the study, each second marking the relentless march of time, a constant reminder of how long this charade had been going on. My mind reeled, replaying countless family dinners, polite conversations, my own internal alarm silenced by Daniel's adoration. All the times I had bitten my tongue, convinced I was the paranoid mother. "There's something else," Daniel said quietly, breaking the silence, his voice now imbued with a chilling calm. "Something I need to show you at the office. It's why she was so desperate to fire you yesterday, why she chose that specific timing." "What do you mean?" I asked, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. "She knows you've been suspicious, Mom," he explained, his eyes fixed on some point beyond me, as if seeing Seraphina's shadowy surveillance. "She's been monitoring your computer access logs, tracking what files you open, what financial records you review within the company system. She fired you because she was afraid you were getting too close, afraid you were about to uncover the full extent of her scheme." The irony was bitter, a metallic taste in my mouth. All this time she had been watching me, the outdated VP, the suspicious mother, carefully tracking my digital footprints. But she hadn't anticipated that Daniel, her beloved husband, would be doing his own detective work. She'd been so focused on me, she'd missed the quiet unraveling of her carefully crafted web around him. "So," I asked, taking a deep breath, the path forward suddenly stark and clear. "What do we do now?" Daniel closed his laptop, a decisive click that seemed to echo through the quiet room. His face was set, resolute. "Now we go to the office and gather every last shred of evidence we can find. Then we call the police and file charges for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Then," he paused, his jaw tight, "I file for divorce, and we try to salvage whatever's left of the company and our lives." My heart ached for him, for the devastation he was enduring. "And personally," I asked softly, "how are you handling all of this, sweetheart?" His composure, so carefully maintained, finally cracked. The mask slipped. His eyes welled up, and his voice was thick with raw emotion. "I don't know, Mom," he confessed, shaking his head slowly. "I thought I knew this person, truly loved her." "How do you process finding out that everything you believed about your life, about your marriage, was a lie? How do you come back from that?" I reached for his hand again. This time he didn't pull away. I squeezed it, offering the silent strength of a mother's love. "One day at a time, Daniel, one truth at a time. And remember that not everything was a lie. Your family is real. The people who truly love you, who have always been there, are real. And the company we built together with honesty and hard work, that is very real." He squeezed my hand back, his grip tightening. "I'm sorry I let her come between us, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you." "You don't need to apologize for loving someone, Daniel. Even if they didn't deserve it," I said, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. "You need to apologize for questioning your mother's judgment." He managed a small, watery smile in return, a glimmer of the old Daniel returning. Your judgment has always been impeccable, Mom, especially about people who don't deserve us. As we prepared to leave, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The truth, however devastating, was finally out. And truth, I knew, was always, always better than a lie. The path ahead would be painful, but at least now we could walk it with open eyes. We arrived at the office at precisely 7:30 a.m., the building still quiet and deserted. The early morning light cast long, eerie shadows down the deserted hallways, a fitting backdrop for the confrontation to come. Daniel's hands, I noticed, trembled slightly as he fumbled with his key, unlocking the main entrance. "Are you sure you want to do this now, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice a low whisper in the cavernous lobby. "We could wait, prepare more thoroughly." He shook his head, his jaw set in a hard line. "I have to, Mom. If I'm going to rebuild this company, rebuild my life, I need to know everything. And besides, she'll be here in an hour. It has to be now, before she has a chance to hide anything else." We made our way to Seraphina's office, the polished floors reflecting our urgent footsteps. With a heavy sigh, I pulled out my master key, the one she had so carelessly forgotten I still possessed, and unlocked her door. The irony was not lost on me. My key, a symbol of my long service and trust, now granted us access to uncover her deceit. Her office, as expected, was immaculate, a testament to her meticulous nature. Daniel went straight for her computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard, trying to access her private files. I, meanwhile, began a systematic search of her desk drawers, my heart thumping with a mixture of fear and determination. In the bottom drawer, tucked neatly beneath a stack of legitimate business files, I found a thin folder conspicuously labeled Personal Insurance. Inside, my breath hitched. There were dozens of emails, casual and incriminating, between Seraphina and Julian Thorne, discussing their plans with an unsettling nonchalance. Plans involving Daniel, his finances, and their future together. "Daniel, you need to see this," I said, my voice tight. He looked up from her computer, his face grim. "Bad news first or worse news first, Mom?" "Let's start with bad," I replied, handing him the printouts. He scanned the emails, his expression darkening with each passing line. He gasped, his eyes widening in horror at one particular exchange. "Look at this one," he murmured, his voice laced with venom. "D is getting suspicious about the missing money. Time to accelerate timelines or make sure evidence points to him, not us." He then turned his computer screen towards me. On it, a detailed log of the fraudulent transfers. "She's been using my login credentials to make the transfers, Mom. Every single transaction shows my username, with timestamps when I was supposedly in the office." A cold dread spread through me. "But you have alibis for those times, don't you?" "That's the genius of it, Mom," he said, a bitter laugh escaping him. "She picked times when I was legitimately in the building, when my card swipe would confirm my presence. But I wasn't at my computer. I was in meetings, on calls in other rooms, or even in the break room getting coffee. She had meticulously planned to ensure that while he was technically present, he was never actually at the helm for those transactions. As we continued our grim search, we uncovered more evidence of her insidious planning, carefully drafted documentation of Daniel's supposed abusive behavior, twisted interpretations of innocent conversations, and even photos of expensive jewelry I had once complimented, now labeled as ostentatious displays of wealth, in her fabricated divorce file. "How did I not see this, Mom?" Daniel asked, staring at a particularly vicious email in which Seraphina mocked his kindness. His voice was raw with self-reproach. "Because you're not a sociopath, Daniel," I said, my hand on his shoulder. "Normal people don't plan the systematic destruction of someone they claim to love. You saw what you wanted to see, what she wanted you to see." At precisely 8:15 a.m., the unmistakable click of high heels echoed down the hallway, far earlier than her usual arrival. Seraphina was early. "What do you want to do?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Confront her," Daniel said, his voice firm, all traces of doubt gone. "With everything. Let her try to lie her way out of this one." We heard her key in the lock, followed by a sharp intake of breath as she stepped into her office and saw us. Daniel, what are you doing here so early? And Eleanor, she added, her eyes narrowing, a dangerous glint in them. I thought your access was revoked. We need to talk, Seraphina, Daniel said, his voice calm, dangerously so. He gestured towards the chair opposite the desk. Please sit down. She forced a smile, her eyes darting between us, assessing the situation. Of course, darling, though I'm not sure why your mother needs to be present for what I assumed would be a private conversation. Because this conversation involves her, Seraphina, Daniel retorted, his voice hardening. It involves a lot of things you've done that involve her and me and this company. He took a deep breath, then spread the printed emails on the desk. Let's start with these. Your correspondence with Julian Thorne. Panic flickered in Seraphina's eyes. A fleeting moment of genuine fear before her practiced composure slammed back into place. I don't know what you're talking about, Daniel. Really? Daniel's voice was icily sarcastic. Because there are quite a few emails discussing our marriage, our finances, and your plans to extract maximum value from both. Oh, and this little gem here, he pointed to a specific line. D is getting suspicious about the missing money. Time to accelerate timeline. Make sure evidence points to him, not us. He shook his head. Are you seriously going to sit there and lie when we have photographs of you with him? He pushed a clear surveillance photo of her kissing Julian across the desk. Seraphina stared at the image, her calculating mind working furiously. Taken last Tuesday, Daniel supplied, his voice flat, the day you told me you were visiting your sick mother in Sacramento. She went still, her facade finally cracking. All right, she said, her voice losing its sugary sweetness, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. So I've been seeing someone else. That doesn't make me a criminal. No, Daniel agreed, his gaze unwavering, but embezzling over $200,000 from our company does. He opened his laptop, displaying the transfer logs. Care to explain these transfers, Seraphina? The ones with my forged signature? She went completely still, her eyes like chips of ice. Those aren't forged, Daniel. You authorized those transfers. You just don't remember because you were so stressed from work. Daniel laughed, a harsh, bitter sound devoid of humor. I was stressed because money kept disappearing, Seraphina. Money that you were stealing. I was protecting our investments, she snapped, her voice rising, losing its careful control. Moving funds to safer accounts during market volatility. Safer accounts, I interjected, unable to hold back. That happened to be in your boyfriend's name, Seraphina Dubois. Her composure, so meticulously maintained, finally shattered. You don't understand the complexity of financial management, Daniel, she spat, her voice laced with contempt. You've always been too trusting, too naive. And you've always been too greedy, Seraphina, I added, and too careless about covering your tracks. Here's what's going to happen, Daniel said, his voice regaining its calm, cutting through her anger. You're going to return every single penny you've stolen. You're going to sign a full confession detailing your fraud, and you're going to leave this company and my life quietly, without a cent. Seraphina slowly stood, her eyes blazing with fury. And if I refuse, Daniel, then I call the police right now, Seraphina, he said, pulling out his phone, and you get arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. Your choice. She smiled then, a chilling, venomous smile, entirely devoid of warmth. You know what, Daniel? You deserve everything that's coming to you. You and your pathetic, jealous mother. She turned her icy glare on me. You never accepted me. You never gave me a chance. I gave you 3 years of chances, Seraphina, I replied, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. You used every single one of them to hurt my son. Your precious son is weak, she sneered, her contempt palpable. He's always been weak. He needed someone strong to make the hard decisions. By stealing from us? Daniel asked, his voice low and dangerous. She grabbed her designer purse from the desk, her face a mask of furious indifference. You want your money back? Sue me. You want to press charges? Go ahead, but you'll never prove anything. And by the time you're done paying lawyers, there won't be a company left to save. She paused at the doorway, turning back, a final cruel parting shot on her lips. "Oh, and darling," she purred, her eyes glinting with malice. "You might want to get tested. Julian and I haven't been exactly exclusive, if you know what I mean." With that final vile cruelty, Seraphina Hayes Dubois walked out of the office, slamming the door shut behind her, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent building. Daniel sat stunned, his face ashen, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. "I think I'm going to be sick," he whispered. I walked over to him, putting my arms around him as he began to shake, the weight of her betrayal finally crashing down. Outside, we heard the screech of tires as Seraphina's car sped away. "It's over, sweetheart," I whispered into his hair, holding him tight. "She's gone, and she can't hurt us anymore." But even as I said the words, I knew it wasn't entirely true. The immediate danger was past, but the damage would take time, immense effort, and deep healing to overcome. And knowing Seraphina, she would likely try to strike back again, in some insidious way. This was merely the end of the beginning. 6 months later, I sat in my office, the familiar scent of old paper and fresh coffee filling the air. It was restored exactly as I had left it on that fateful day. The chipped coffee mug, the thriving succulent, even the slightly tilted photograph of Daniel as a boy. My office, my sanctuary, a tangible symbol of resilience. The financial reports on my desk, once a source of anxiety, now showed our company not just recovering, but thriving, growing steadily beyond all expectations. It hadn't been easy. The weeks immediately following Seraphina's dramatic exit had been a whirlwind of frantic activity. Police reports, emergency board meetings, insurance claims, and aggressive damage control dominated our lives. The news of the embezzlement and identity theft had rocked the company, but the loyalty of our employees and Daniel's decisive leadership helped us weather the storm. Seraphina, predictably, had filed a baseless counter lawsuit, attempting to paint herself as the victim of a vindictive mother-in-law and a controlling husband. But her flimsy case fell apart spectacularly when the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, brought in by Daniel, got involved. The federal investigation had unveiled a much larger, more chilling picture. Seraphina Dubois, as she was now officially known, had been running variations of the same sophisticated con for nearly a decade, with confirmed victims in 3 other states. Her pattern was clear: insinuate herself into the lives of wealthy, trusting men, exploit their affections, steal their money, and then vanish, leaving a trail of fabricated accusations and financial ruin. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Daniel, looking healthier and remarkably peaceful, stepped into my office. The haunted expression that had clung to him like a shadow for so long had finally receded, replaced by a quiet strength. "Morning, Mom," he said, a genuine smile lighting his eyes. "Coffee, please?" He placed a fresh mug on my desk, steam curling invitingly. "The Henderson contract came through," he announced, his smile widening. "They want us to handle their entire West Coast expansion." "That's wonderful news, sweetheart," I replied, a wave of relief washing over me. It was a major deal, one that would not only secure our company's future, but effectively erase the last vestiges of Seraphina's financial damage. "There's something else," Daniel continued, his tone turning serious. "I got a call from Agent Miller this morning. Seraphina's trial date has been set." A familiar tightness settled in my chest, a residual echo of the fear and anger I had once felt. "Will you have to testify?" "Have I?" I asked, bracing myself. "If they need me to," he answered, shaking his head slightly. "But Agent Miller thinks they have more than enough evidence. She's facing federal charges in 4 states, not just for the embezzlement, but for identity theft and multi-state fraud. They're pushing for a plea deal." "Good," I said, the word coming out sharper than intended. "The sooner this is all behind us, the better." Daniel studied my face, his gaze perceptive. "You're still angry, aren't you?" "Not angry, Bayrena," I corrected him, looking out the window at the bustling street below. Disappointed, deeply disappointed that someone could be so calculated, so willing to systematically destroy people who genuinely cared about her, all for personal gain. "I've been thinking a lot about that," Daniel admitted, his voice quiet. "How she fooled me so completely. How I could have been so blind." "You loved her, or at least you loved who you thought she was," I explained, turning back to him. And that's not a character flaw, Daniel. That's what makes you human. I saw through her because I looked at her as a threat to my son, a threat to our family. You looked at her as someone you wanted to build a life with, someone you trusted. We were both right in our own ways, and we were both vulnerable in different ones. Daniel looked out the window, his gaze distant for a moment. Then he turned back, a subtle warmth in his eyes. I started seeing someone, Mom, he said suddenly, a hint of nervousness in his tone. My heart leaped, a burst of unexpected joy. Tell me about her, I prompted, a hopeful smile blooming on my face. Her name is Sophia. She's a teacher at the elementary school down the street. We met at the coffee shop near her school. He grinned, a genuine, easy smile that erased years of strain. She's nothing like what I thought I wanted before. Tell me more, I urged, my curiosity piqued. She's quiet, thoughtful. She makes me laugh, but not in that desperate way, not the way Seraphina did, demanding attention. It's just easy, comfortable. And she knows about Seraphina, Mom, everything. I told her early on, laid it all out. And she just listened. Then she said the fact I could still trust enough to tell her meant I was going to be okay. He paused, looking directly at me. I'd like you to meet her, Mom, if you're comfortable with that. It was more than an introduction. It was an offering of trust, a test. I'd love to meet her, Daniel, I said, truly meaning it. But promise me something. Anything, Mom, he replied, his hand finding mine, a familiar warmth in his grip. Promise me that no matter what happens in your life, no matter who you meet, you won't let anyone convince you that your family is the enemy. What we have, what we've rebuilt together, it's real, and it's worth protecting. He squeezed my hand. I promise, Mom, never again. A few minutes later, Maya, our meticulous accounting assistant, poked her head into my office. Agent Miller is here to see you, Mrs. Vance, she announced, then added with a dry, knowing smile. No relation to Seraphina, she assures me. Agent Miller, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, entered. Mrs. Vance, your testimony and the evidence you and Daniel collected were instrumental in building our case against Seraphina Dubois, she said, closing a heavy file. We've now connected her to crimes in 6 states. The total stolen from her various victims over an 8-year period is close to $2 million. What will happen to her now, I asked, a sense of weary finality settling over me. She's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison, Agent Miller confirmed. Not eligible for parole for at least 15 years. Her plea deal will reflect that. Justice moves slowly, Mrs. Vance, she concluded, a faint smile on her lips. But it does move. As the sun began to set, casting long golden streaks across my office, I reflected on our survival. The survival of our business, our family, our ability to trust again. It had been a harrowing journey, but we had emerged, scarred but unbroken. Later that evening, as I was locking up, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Sophia wants to cook dinner for us Sunday. Her lasagna, she promises, is better than yours. I told her that's impossible, but she's determined to prove me wrong. A genuine laugh bubbled up from deep within me. Challenge accepted, I texted back. Should I bring my famous garlic bread as backup? His reply was immediate. Definitely. And Mom, thank you for everything. I left the office, the building standing tall and proud, a symbol not just of a company, but of what we had almost lost and fought so hard to keep. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean, carrying the promise of a peaceful night. I stood by my car for a moment, looking back at the building, feeling a profound sense of peace. Complete, uncomplicated peace. As I drove home, I found myself planning what to wear for Sophia, imagining their future. This time I thought I'd start from a place of trust. Not every woman who loved my son was a threat. Some, perhaps, might be exactly what we needed to make our family complete.